Real people, real stories, and real challenges that break the status quo. I'm your host, Zivile, and welcome to Perception Paradox. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Perception Paradox, a special, I would call it brief fireside chat episode straight from Latitude 59 happening in Tallinn. My name is Zivile. I'm the host of Perception Paradox podcast, and I have with me all the way from African and Australian continents, Caleb from Tech Safari. Welcome, Caleb.
Thanks. Great to be here. And I guess it's like a breakfast fireside. So we just had our breakfast quickly.
Yeah.
I'm drinking my orange juice, and it's early morning before we go to Latitude.
Yeah, and before you hit the stage, right?
Yes. Yeah. On stage in like 15 minutes. So.
Love it. Amazing. That's the way to do it. It's a good warm-up, you know, your voice, the parts.
Definitely. Yeah. It's a solid warm-up.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So how is it going? How is Latitude for you so far? And is it your first time in Estonia?
It's my second time. So I was here last year for Latitude as well. And man, it's a really interesting country and a very interesting city, Tallinn as well. So I like being here. It's very like trendy, very cool, and it feels a bit like you're living in the future.
Okay.
I grew up in Australia, but I'm Ethiopian, and even in Australia, like it's a pretty advanced country, but it's not as like tech embedded. You know, you don't have tech everywhere around you, and here it feels like you're kind of like a few decades in the future. So
amazing, so great to hear. So I was really curious, and I think the audience as well, to learn more about your Tech Safari newsletter. I've got to know about you through my ecosystem friends in Africa, and I was like, oh, that looks cool. And it was, I think, a year ago maybe.
Nice.
And I just saw your news, like 53,000 subscribers, and your guys up on speed and just going very fast, no?
100%. Yeah. So that's right. Tech Safari is a media company covering tech in Africa. And it's a newsletter-based media company. So we just hit 53,000 subs.
Sick.
I announced it yesterday. So very timely news. And our whole idea is, look, how do you talk about what's happening in tech in Africa, but in a way that actually includes the context? Sometimes, you know, it's easy to talk about like this thing happened in this place, but it's very hard to understand what is going on in that place that makes this possible. There's a lot of nuances across the continent. There's 54 countries. They each have different like groups, different ways that technology works with them, different cultures, different norms. And our idea is like, how do we just explain what's happening across the continent in very plain English, in language that anyone can understand, so they can walk away with a concept or an idea that informs them and hopefully encourages them to take a next step and get more involved. So
yeah, that's pretty cool. How did you start doing this? Because you mentioned that you have a small fund and you were doing different entrepreneurial activities within the scene.
Yeah, by accident, to be honest.
I love it. The best.
The story is, the honest story is I raised a small fund with a friend. By chance. Like we were running a company that was doing well in Africa, across Africa. So Africa, I say in Africa, but like we know that means a few countries in Africa, like Nigeria and Kenya, in this case. And we had investors in that company who were saying, hey, like we're really curious about what's going on there. And me, you know, being originally Ethiopian, spending a lot of time there, and before working in tech, working in policy in East Africa, I was like, cool, well, like we can invest some more money on your behalf, and kind of as a joke. And they're like, yeah, sure, okay. So we raised a small fund. It was a good time. This is 2021. Money was flowing.
Yeah, that's a perfect time.
And so like it's been a great experience. We still have the fund. It's called Proximity Ventures, and we're still investing a little bit. But the whole idea was like explore what's happening in that market, find some great companies, invest in them and learn, and then eventually raise a second fund. And my whole theory of change was I had worked in policy before that, and then before that in advocacy. And I wanted to really just see, you know, what are the paths for change and impact that we have on the continent? And I was a bit disenfranchised with policy. I found that was, you know, government is hard to work with, not as reliable across the continent in most countries. Institutions don't have African interests in mind, which we talked about. And so what's left, you know, like what actually is a viable pathway? And tech was this kind of opportunity for different countries, the continent to develop really quickly, while putting actually hopefully local founders in the front seat, where they're choosing what happens and they're solving their own problems at scale. So this was really interesting to me, and I thought that the best way to have impact was through investing. I was like, why don't I fund entrepreneurs, because there's probably not enough funding. What I learned from that fund was a few things. One was like there actually is funding, but there's also just like there's not a strong enough. We're still very early in the tech space, and so we're still at our first like $10 billion companies, which is just the very start, right? Like where we'll get real returns is in the next 10, 20 years. And so capital isn't really the problem. It's actually more like infrastructure of how do you build a tech ecosystem. So I'm about to tie it up. I know it's a long response to a
No, it's great. It's actually, it portrays really well what's happening and your logic behind getting into the tech safari.
Fantastic, cool. So I guess like I had raised the fund. I didn't really know what I was doing. It was my first time as a fund manager. And so I started writing about what I was seeing. I was like, hey guys, like I just used M-Pesa, mobile money in Kenya. Or like, hey guys, I just learned that like, in Nigeria, like you have to pay for your rent 1 year up front. You can't pay month by month.
Oh, wow.
It's like, this is crazy. And I found like different companies solving some of these novel problems and sharing them online. What happened was, as I started telling more and more of those stories, people really engaged. And the reason for that was that I was telling it from just like a guy who could sit with, like from Australia, who could sit with you and just explain it over a beer, but online. And we kept going viral. And I was like, okay, maybe this is actually the missing piece, which is we're not telling enough stories or giving enough valuable information on what's happening in this tech space for people who are sitting maybe outside of that, or even in different African markets. And so I came back I was traveling the continent for about 2 or 3 months. I came back, went to Australia. I left the company I was at, and I just moved in with my parents and sat down and wrote this newsletter for 3 months.
Love it.
And I was like, let's see what happens.
Hustle, yeah.
And if it sucks, I'll just get a job. Like if it doesn't work, I'll get a job. And then it took off. And I think over time I realized that I always wanted to do a second fund, but I realized the real value was, can you build strong media that connects Africa with the rest of the world, or Africa globally, with different African markets? That's now evolved into Tech Safari with 50,000 subscribers, but also we have an events platform. So we host events around the world. We actually launched Latitude 59, this event in Estonia. We launched them in Kenya. And the last event that we did together with them had over 2,000 people there.
Wonderful.
So that's a big part of our business. And then now we've also launched a talent function. So we help companies hire mid-level talent in Africa, especially in Kenya. So we kind of realize, like, people talk about infrastructure as, tech infrastructure, or like, building rails, but actually, like in a tech ecosystem, there's soft infrastructure through like media, events to bring people together, and then just like getting people in jobs. And we want to build that stack for the African tech ecosystem.
That is super cool, because I did hear like the way people invest in Africa and the way the decks are floating and the talents, it's all on WhatsApp. So you have to know the guy to know the guy, or to be part of the WhatsApp group, and then to see if it's legitimate or it's a scam,
It's one of my favorite things. It's like, it's so interesting. Like when you think about these nuances in markets, it's like, everyone's like, if I get like all these sort of like ratings on Trustpilot or like on Google reviews, people will think it's reliable. But really, like so much of, I would say like a lot of the African markets I've spent time in, the economy is just like trust-based. It's like, I trust you, so I trust you to give me a good referral on someone else. Not I go to a website to find a cleaner, or like like someone to like do a service. It's like no, I'd ask my friends, because everything is trust based. And so a lot of business actually operates on WhatsApp or social media.
Wild, that's crazy. Where do you see the major growth right now in the startup scene in Africa? Which verticals are booming? And because I just came back from Morocco from one conference, and fintech was really like up the roof, and everyone's talking about fintech, a lot focused on health. But since you are literally an insider who's going through so many decks and stories, where do you see you are as a continent right now?
I mean, it is really hard to answer that, because I think that there's like potential for almost all spaces. I think that it's easy to say which markets we think are very difficult to scale in. I would say like the baseline of everything is always like, can you pay someone to do a transaction? Like economies grow on trade. which means that like in order for trade to like scale, you need to have payments, which is why fintech is just such a big part of our ecosystem right now. It's like people always say, oh, there's so many fintechs, we don't need more. But actually we do, because payments are broken. It's really hard to pay someone. And there are some markets where it's easy, like in Kenya you have M-Pesa, which is mobile money, and so everyone uses that, and that's like a miracle of a story.
Yeah.
But you go to other markets and it's just like, I remember I was in Accra in Ghana, until like I was there last weekend and then I got here on Tuesday. And man, like I had to pay for my coffee, and at this really nice cafe. It was like bougie, and I went there and both my cards declined. My tap to pay didn't work. I had to take an Uber to go back to my house to get my other card. Tried that, didn't work. And then I had to go and like withdraw cash from an ATM. So I spent 30 minutes trying to figure out how to pay someone at a really nice cafe, like where they take card.
Yeah.
So if like payments is broken at that level, think about what it means for like, cross-border payments at scale. So yeah, payments is like kind of the foundational layer, and you can even look at companies like Amazon. Amazon didn't work until you had like payment infrastructure and logistics infrastructure to then do deliveries. So we're kind of still building infrastructure, and sometimes it's really boring stuff like payments. Yeah.
But it's solving the problem, right? The problem that will open up so many doors.
Exactly.
I'm very curious about the talent situation, right? So to build tech, you need talent, and that has specific backgrounds. And I've been reading that there is also a bit of a brain drain wave happening in some of the African countries. But what's the situation, and what has to be done to have enough talent to actually to fulfill those big visions for the tech?
Yeah, I would say the challenge we have is like, it's a bit existential, where you have this rapidly growing population, like the most young people in the world, in Africa. And like, I think it's like by 2050, half or 1/3 of the world's population will be from the continent, which is huge.
It's wild.
It's wild.
Yeah.
And it should be like really exciting and this really cool opportunity. But the reality is, unless they're like highly trained or educated, that's actually a massive pool of people who actually can't get jobs. And there's actually a deficit in the number of jobs that are available on the continent, which is why that sort of growing number could be a risk. And then I think the reality is a lot of like people who have the skills and the means are quite likely to take the opportunity to move abroad and work abroad, because there's like, let's say, better opportunities there in some cases. So you have this like dilemma where you have a section of the population who are actually willing and able to like do great impactful work in the tech space, but they actually move abroad. And then you have a big sort of like group of like basically young people who need skills to eventually get these jobs. And so we need solutions that actually mass skill and like mass train people to get into jobs, maybe not even tech jobs, and maybe more of the boring stuff like services, or like, services, IT generally, maybe not like tech developers per se. So it's kind of an existential thing. I think that in the tech space, what I have found is that you have a lot of people who are generally trained. There's a lot of programs to learn tech, but that doesn't necessarily translate to experience or the ability to like work effectively in a role. And so we find that there's almost this mismatch. You have employers who really want to find great talent, but they struggle. Then you have really good talent who is maybe just not represented well, who can't find good jobs. And that's actually why we built this talent function of Tech Safari called Talent Safari, which is like, how do we match these two? How do we find like really good talent through, similar actually to what we were saying, through a community, so people who are referred in for their work. And then how do we match them to employers who want to hire great talent from our community? And we have a big community because Tech Safari is has quite large reach. We reach like 1 million people a month, so like that's a lot of like reach. And people who fill those those roles or demographics and are at a certain skill set, we admit them in, and then that's actually our talent pool. So we help them get the next opportunity. So, sorry, there's a lot there, but I think like in general, tech talent I think needs a bit more like training, experience, etc., to get to a point where we have an influx, like a lot of tech talent. But until then, I think it's like smaller circles that are where you can find the best tech talent. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Well, African continent and tech is really hot right now, and everyone is trying to break through. There are different roundtables happening. What's hot in Africa? How do we break through? Whom do we work with? What would you say to someone who is listening to us and looking into a continent and want to, one way or another, to collaborate, to start working? Where should they look at, or where should they start besides Tech Safari?
Yeah, so read Tech Safari.
Tech
It's
Safari,
a
right?
valuable resource. I think like anyone reading that will get a rundown on what's happening every week in tech in Africa, and then also like a deep dive into something interesting that's going on. So that will be valuable. The next step is you should just come check it out. Like if you can do a trip, like go check out one of the big ecosystems or a smaller one, and just see what's happening. And I think what you find is like people in the space are really welcoming, and it's the same thing I had when I traveled to Kenya, Rwanda, Nigeria. I just told people, hey, I'm in town, I'm learning, like, would you be up for a coffee? And it worked. I met a lot of great people, and that's how I got embedded into that space. And I think similarly, like, I would encourage anyone who's interested in that ecosystem to come check it out. It's a fun time, and it's like such a unique time that I think it would just shape a lot of how you think about the continent anyway. And you know, the sort of last thing, like the element of Tech Safari that we also always wanted to change was that Africa is like, people think of that continent and think of problems. Of course we have problems, but this tech story is like one of the most inspiring and exciting things that's happening. And it's changing lives at scale. Like we've seen that through M-Pesa, through like other fintechs, other companies. And I think I want more people to see that up front, like, and redefine that story through seeing it in practice. So I think that's something that would be great, having more people come visit the continent.
And you're organizing the Latitude in Kenya, right?
Yeah.
When is that happening next?
First week of December. Yeah.
Oh, so that's pretty soon, actually.
Yeah.
Oh my God, time flies.
Yeah.
And so before we wrap up, I still would like to ask a couple of questions. So one of them, what would be the common misconceptions you noticed through your travels and work outside the continent that, let's say, European tech has about the continent?
That's hard. That's a tough question. Why is it a tough question?
It's okay, we have time. We don't even have to dig deeper, but...
Yeah. Like they go on two sides. One is that there's nothing in Africa. There's no potential. It's scary, and that's like a dangerous stereotype, right? And it's shaped by the way that media has narrated the whole continent. So there's that perspective, which is, oh, Africa, no, not interested. Then the other one, which is also like, it's not harmful, but it's not helpful either, is like, Africa's full of opportunity, and if I go there, I'm going to make $1 billion. And it's like, that's also not true, because it's a growing market. Like, it's still early. And so like over-indexing on Africa is something that we've seen a lot of funds do. So like a lot of funds like have come into the continent, and we've seen a lot of companies grow very quickly, especially in 2021 and 2022 during like the bull run. And a lot of those funders didn't get returns. And so because they said Africa's the future, yep, let's invest billions. Now they're like, we're not doing that anymore. So there's kind of this issue in like having inflated expectations about a market, especially one that you're not committed to investing in for a long time. So I think it's like, there's no misconception, but it's more like, oh, there's nothing in Africa, or like everything is there. You want to be somewhere in the middle with like, you know, better.
Some kind of more misaligned expectations from the market, or what do you want to get in return?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, interesting. And what excites you about the future with Tech Safari and what you're building and creating?
Yeah, it's just like, yeah, I mean, there's so many things. It's just fun building with, I think I would say, some of the most exceptional people in the space. And we have an incredible team who are all like, you know, kind of just, everyone's a creative, everyone's fun, everyone like gets along. We just had our offsite in Accra. It was such a good time. And I think we see it every day, like the impact that we're having in the space. So that's really exciting. The future, it's actually like, there's nothing that crazy that we're going to do in the next, you know, like between now and the end of the year, other than keep doing the things we're doing.
The size of subscribers?
I mean, that could happen. Yeah. I mean, that could happen. Yeah. But it's interesting because I'm like, the inputs that go into that is just doing what we're doing now, which is cool. So we'll be doing a lot of the same old, like hosting events, bringing people together, telling the story, recruiting, and doing those well for a long time.
I love your storytelling approach. I think it's really super, it's easy to connect with the content and then to get really engaged and dive deeper into that. So that's really great approach. And what would be the key characteristics, like, because yourself, you said you also did some investments, you've been within the scene on different roles. What are the key characteristics of a founder? That key traits that really allows them to do the big dreaming and big work.
Yeah. I think like you have to be so tough. Like, yeah, I mean, we've invested in a lot of companies, and I think the ones that have done well, like almost all of them have come to a point of like reckoning whether like, can we even continue, or like this thing's happened and the government's like taken our banking license, we're screwed. And they'll find a way around it. Like there's like, if you think that building a company in Europe's hard, like in Africa, it's like I think you're like on easy to medium mode here, and then in Africa you're on hard mode because there's like way less consumers. There's all these like regulatory things you have to think about, and then yeah, it's just hard to scale. So I think you have to be tough to build a company that. Yeah.
It sounds also like you have to be creative.
Yeah,
it's
sure.
like you have to find your ways around all the things that does not allow you to build and create.
Exactly. Like I don't know any founder who's had an easy time building a company, and maybe that's normal, but like I think there's just a different set of things. So there's that, and then I think on top of that, it's like really like sitting, like that whole thing about like spending time with your customers. That's like times 2 or 3 on the continent, because there's just like every market is so different, and your customers are so different every time. So if you're launching in Kenya, or you're in Kenya and you want to go to Uganda, you almost have to rethink your products for that market.
Do the ecosystems like in Kenya, Uganda, let's say Rwanda, do they collaborate, or it's still in process?
No, not really. Like not as countries, but companies do launch across those different.
Okay, so business-wise, happening, ecosystem-wise, that's where Latitude is happening, to bring people together.
Exactly. I think that's why it's important.
Yeah. Okay. We're getting closer to the end. I have a tradition on the podcast, so I like to leave the audience with the thought to ponder through the day after the episode. So what would be your thought, question, piece of wisdom for the audience to think about?
Okay, cool.
It can be entrepreneurship, life, philosophy.
I like this. Okay. So Africa, like people say this and sometimes I'm like, it's cringe, but it is true, which is Africa is the future. Like soon the people you work with will be online, they'll be from the continent, or like soon migration is also a factor. So if this part of the world is the future, it's worth thinking, what is your relationship with Africa, if you have one? And what are you going to do about that? Like, what's an action you can take or a thing you can do to better understand the continent, or go deeper into the space, or even just like go to your local like Ethiopian restaurant? Like how do you engage deeper with the continent? Because you look at it on every front. It's like technology, migration, talent, music. Like music, one of the biggest genres in the world is like the biggest artists like Burna Boy in Thailand now. It's Rema. Like these are African artists. So like the continent's taking over. So like it's worth everyone thinking, what is your relationship with the continent, and how do you go a bit deeper into it?
Beautiful. Caleb, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. It was Caleb from Tech Safari, live from Latitude 59. Have a great day wherever you are, and I guess follow, subscribe, Tech Safari and Caleb. I will leave the links in the show notes. And thank you so much for tuning in today.
Nice one. That was great. That was so fun.